Ever feel like talking about money with your spouse is like navigating a minefield? Many couples struggle with this, and it often leads to frustration and misunderstandings, and sometimes one partner even shuts down completely. Most people don't realize this, but if you just start talking to your spouse about money and their eyes glaze over and they get frustrated, it's probably because they feel misunderstood, and even more so, they're probably bored. It feels like you aren't even speaking the same language. And that's because you're not. You see, money isn't just numbers, money is emotional. It's tied to dreams and goals, it's also tied to pain and fears. If you're watching this right now, chances are you fancy yourself as the rational one, or at least the responsible one. And I bet your fat spouse feels misunderstood. Now, by the end of this talk, my goal is for you to understand why your spouse is responding this way. And probably even more importantly, you're going to have a strategy for having conversations that avoid these common pitfalls. I'm Dr. Joshua Wilson, and I simplify the psychology of money and investing. I'm here to help you bridge that gap between understanding your money and understanding how to better communicate about money with the people that you love. So, before we get started, please take a second to like this video and follow this account so you don't miss any valuable content on money and relationships. Today, I'm talking about how to effectively have conversations about money with your spouse, especially the spouse that hates talking about money. You know the conversation, the one that keeps getting put off or always ends in a fight. Maybe you've tried to make your spouse more rational about money, explaining how it works, but that hasn't worked. So instead of trying to connect on a rational level, let's try a different approach. Emotions drive decisions more than we often realize, and understanding this can be a game changer in your financial discussions. So, let's focus on connecting and communicating with them at the emotional level. First, why is your spouse responding poorly to a conversation that obviously needs to be had and is ultimately in their best interest? The answer is cognitive biases. Now, that's just a fancy way of saying science has identified ways our brains make mistakes when thinking. But hold on. Simply telling your spouse you're making a mistake in your thinking, well, that's not going to get you very good luck, and you probably might sleep on the couch. So, in fact, I'll probably make them shut down. So, please resist the temptation to use this video as an opportunity to educate your spouse about their mistakes. Instead, we're going to strategically navigate those mistakes, but first we have to understand them. The first mistake is called confirmation bias. This means we tend to notice and are even drawn to information that confirms our existing beliefs. So ask yourself, what does my spouse typically accuse me of when I try to talk about money? Maybe you're condescending. Maybe you're just no fun. Maybe you use language that they don't understand. So I'm curious to learn what you hear from your spouse. So let me know in the comments so I can give you some more specific pointers. But whatever it is, when your spouse gets triggered and then shuts down, that's going to ruin the conversation. So, the number one goal has to be to prevent your spouse from shutting down. That's tricky because your spouse is going to be looking for evidence that you're doing it. Again, whatever that it is for you. So, the key to having a good conversation is to avoid triggering confirmation bias. Words matter. It's not always exactly what you say that matters, but the feelings that those words give your partners, and those feelings can vary from partner to partner, word to word. So until you change your partner's feelings, you're very unlikely to change their mind, much less their behavior. To communicate with your bored and misunderstood partner, you're going to have to learn to speak to feelings. More on that in a minute, but first, let's talk about the next mistake. It's called loss aversion. That means people tend to fear losses more than they value gains. You see, discussing finance often brings up concerns about potential losses. That can trigger anxiety. That can trigger fear. That leads to shutting down. That loss could be money. It could be control. It could be a routine even, a way of life. It could be the loss of the status quo, just whatever they're used to, loss of their routine, a loss of most anything you can think of. For example, you say something like, we need to talk about the budget. But what your partner feels is pain. And they have an emotional reaction. Why? Well, because you said the word budget. And when they hear that, they hear, I'm about to lose my trips to Starbucks. Or he hears, she's about to, cancel my subscription to NFL Sunday ticket. Or it just triggered a bad emotion from their childhood. So let me know in the comments what your spouse fears losing the most. Maybe I can cover that in a future video. Now listen closely because I'm about to tell you a very powerful communication secret. Now, regardless of what it is, whatever that fear is, because of that fear, you need to frame the conversation in terms of what is to be gained and not in terms of what is to be lost. In order to battle loss aversion, we need to raise the value of what is being pursued, raise the value of what is to be gained, because they fear losing what they have. So, in order to change, they have to believe that what they're getting is more valuable than what they're losing. So, we have to, first, to do that, we've got to stimulate emotions around what is to be gained. And eventually we'll connect the actions we can take today to the big dream of tomorrow. Now, if certain words are triggering negative feelings, change your words. It's not always exactly what you say that matters, but the feelings that those words give your partner. If the feelings aren't good, change the words. Change your words, you might change their feelings. Of course, I can't stress this enough. Your tone matters. It won't matter if you change your words if you speak in an unattractive tone. Now, let's talk about some strategies for effective communication with people who are making these cognitive mistakes. But real quick, before we do that, don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an update. All right. First, make sure the goal of the conversation is to first disarm your partner and give them positive, stimulating emotions. The goal is not to convince them to have a conversation about money. Your goal at this point is to focus on what your partner wants and build its value in their mind. Why is that important? Right? How would life be better? What problems would this solve? Um, how would it make them feel about themselves or about their family? I mean, what's in it for them? If they change, what do they get? They know it's really available in their mind what it costs them, but what do they get? So, what are the reasons they would want this? What does the end game look like? And most importantly, how will it make them feel? Remember, we may be using words to communicate, but those words are creating emotions. Most of us use language that shuts down emotion when we're talking about money. But at this stage, which is a buy in stage, I want you to use language that promotes emotion, positive emotion. So, this person that typically hates talking about money and hates numbers, I bet they love emotion. I bet they love positive emotion. I bet they love dreaming. So, let's lean into that to create the value of eventual behavioral changes. For example, some people hate the word goals. So, saying you're going to have a conversation about your goals sounds stuffy and boring. Instead, think of it more like a dreams conversation rather than a goals conversation. Make sure you create a safe space. Make sure it's calm, non threatening, somewhere that they're comfortable. And be careful about creating too much formality early on in the conversation. Remember, it's about creating the feeling, not about the reason, not about the words, but the feeling. So let's give an example. If you say we're going to sit down with our notebooks and talk about our goals, that's going to be overwhelming to a lot of people. If you start this conversation in a manner that your partner will be more comfortable in, you're probably going to have a better conversation. This is probably going to be a way that you're less comfortable in. So if you love the idea of sitting down with a notebook, chances are your partner is probably not the same way. And if you want to inspire change, do it their way. So consider taking a walk or doing something your partner enjoys. And because what you're trying to do, again, is avoid triggering that confirmation bias that leads to them to believe that this is going to be just the same as all the other conversations that ended poorly. You're disrupting that pattern. Get it? Now, I mean, they say everyone's heard it said. I think maybe Einstein said this. I don't know, but the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So finally, let's try it differently. That emotional partner, well, let's talk to their emotions. Next, make sure your partner knows that this is a partnership, not a confrontation. If your partner believes you're accusing them of being irresponsible or not caring, they're going to be keen to notice anything that confirms that suspicion. Remember, confirmation bias is them subconsciously looking for things that confirm the suspicion. So you've got to strategically not do anything to confirm that suspicion that will inspire them to shut down. So keep this away from talking about specific things that your partner needs to change. The conversation at this stage is not about specific actions. It's about buying into the final destination. It's about the final dream. It's not about how things need to change. It's about what they want the future to look like and how it will feel. We're using emotional and positive framing. We're talking about the positive aspects of what the future looks like. If you're trying to shift the conversation from talking about money and spreadsheets to talking about shared experiences and feelings, the more, this is important because the more vivid you can get them to talk about those experiences and feelings, the more valuable and motivating those experiences and feelings will be. You see, people don't change unless they have a really good reason to change. They need to believe that there is a lot in it for them and that it is very good. What they are giving up pales in comparison to the deal that they're going to get. Everyone loves the deal. But remember, people tend to fear losing their status quo even more than they value things improving. So, to inspire change in someone, they first must have something in mind that they really, really want. So, your goal for the conversation is to get them emotionally involved in how much better life will be in the future when they get what they want. Now, I'm a big fan of taking notes because they're going to come in later, but sometimes starting to take notes at the beginning of a conversation can be intimidating because it can seem, formal, too formal and intimidating. So you can have it ready to go, easily findable, but I think that sometimes, get the conversation going first if you're working with someone who's liable to get fearful and feel attacked or be doesn't like formality. So then, as the person begins to get excited and paint the vision, then you might say, hey, this is so good. I love what you're saying. I want to take some notes. That is going to be well received because that shows you're listening and valuing what they have to say. When's the last time you were talking and someone said, especially a spouse, hold on, this is so great. I'm going to take some notes. Okay. So that is going to show you're engaged and likely make them even more excited. So take good notes, especially note their feelings and try to describe those feelings because you're going to need these notes later. All right. Now, challenge them to develop the feelings. Why do they feel that way? Don't just write down what they said they wanted, but note the feeling words so you can pull those back out later. When you do start taking notes, maybe, put at the top of the paper, how does it make them feel? That's going to remind you when you're reviewing these things later and help you to create the questions as you go. Now, key here, I want you to resist the urge to try to make progress at this stage. What I mean is like agree on next steps because we're not trying to talk about what specific things need to change right now. This conversation is about creating a dream that your partner is excited to pursue, positive emotional stimulation, something that they're excited to pursue, and having a conversation that is positive, that breaks the cycle of negative conversations, and that your partner is going to be eager to continue this conversation. Okay. So, excitement, it really just comes down to excitement is a positive emotional stimulation. So, your goal is to create excitement. Also, resist the urge to answer questions right away. You're creating excitement. If detailed questions come up about changes, just say something like, well, this is an informal conversation. We can talk more about the details later. I really just want to learn about what you want in life. I want to please you. I want us to get where we want. Make it all about fun. You've heard the expression. I think the Disney movie was Mary Poppins, and she said, a spoonful of sugar helps medicine go down. Well, let's make this conversation all about sugar at this stage and none of the medicine. Medicine will come later. But show empathy, be patient, and don't judge. Remember, the goal is about getting the good feelings out and disrupting the negative pattern. So, let's hear from you. What questions will you ask your spouse during your dreams talk? Let me know in the comments so maybe I can discuss those another time or give you some feedback. Now, I want you to end the conversation on a high note and show some enthusiasm. Now, that's hard for a person like me because I'm naturally kind of stoic in my conversations. But I want you to show some enthusiasm. Say something like, hey, this has been awesome. I loved hearing about this, and I'm excited to go think about what you said. Let's talk more about this again, and maybe next time we can share some ideas on making it happen. I'm going to think about the things you said and add my ideas to it because I think this is a great dream, and I want us to work together to make this happen. Now, you're going to know it went well if it ends on a good, dreamy emotion, an emotional high. You want to leave them, you want them to leave this conversation with, good feelings and to keep thinking about it even after the conversation is over. And if your spouse, a day or two later is still bringing up other things, then you'll know that it was a really good conversation. They're still thinking about it. They're still feeling about it. That's a good sign. And the longer that good feeling about the future and dreaming about the future stays with them, the better. So you want to build up how they will feel when these things are achieved. Do this right. For the next conversation, they're more likely to start off with a good feeling. Now, you've made more progress than you think. You had a conversation that was adjacent to money, and most importantly, your spouse didn't shut down. You broke the cycle. Those cognitive biases didn't get triggered. Big win. Now, for the next conversation, they're more likely to start off in a good feeling, a good mood, and not expect the conversation to go poorly. So many of us just forget about how important it is to just start a conversation without the expectation that will go poorly. Happens with a lot of couples. So, but first, before we move on, let's first review. The key is to avoid triggering cognitive biases, that loss aversion and that confirmation bias. They're looking for the same patterns to be repeated. You want to disrupt that pattern and don't give them a reason to have that confirmation bias. Next, you want to build up the value of the ultimate goal, the ultimate dream. That's going to help because the changes are requiring them to lose something, right? So we want to build up the value of the next phase. Okay. So next, create a safe space. We're going to use that positive emotional framing, take notes, and generate excitement. Don't try to solve problems. Generate excitement. Now, focus on getting your partner emotionally involved in the dream, and when the conversation ends, make sure it's on a positive note. You want them to leave the conversation thinking about how great it would be to have all those things. Now, Before we talk about the next conversation, you've got some homework to do. Before you have the next conversation, you need to take a look at your notes and reorder some of the things and think about prerequisites for things. For example, let's start with reordering. You're going to have a lot of things listed, but some of them need to be accomplished before others. So let's say you want to buy a dream home, but you want to take a vacation first. In that case, we need to, buy a dream home before we take a vacation, because you're going to have a conversation with your partner and say, honey, that was so good. What do you think if we start off by pursuing X, because X needs to be the next thing to come, right? Now, when you start the next conversation, you can bring your notebook, but do not give in to the temptation to take over the conversation with your notes. Instead, I want you to review the notes that you made about their positive feelings and vision for the future from the last conversation. Why? Because your first goal is to get them back into the positive state of mind, that emotional stimulation that we left off with. You want to start the conversation with an emotional high by spending at least 10 minutes reviewing the dream, talking about it. Now, I know what you're thinking. God, this is a lot of work. Okay, but you've wasted a lot of work over time trying to get them to think like you think. This is actually a much more efficient way of doing it, trying something different than doing the same thing that never works. Okay, so yeah, I get it. This is tough for some people to make this emotional, but we're trying something different. If you're doing it this way, it's because what you did before didn't work. So, how did it make them feel? Is there anything they've thought about since the last time? What things are, most important to them? Tell me in the comments. Tell me things that make you and your spouse most emotionally stimulated. Are they the same things? That's an important note. Now, once they're back on that emotional high, you're going to create an agreement on what your partner really wants and build its value in their mind. The higher the value, the more they're willing to make a change to go after it. Once you've reviewed the dreams and the feelings associated with them, then hey, let's talk about what it's going to take to get there. Maybe you say, I've been trying to think of a plan to make this happen, and I want to get your thoughts on it. Then explain your thought process. But I don't mean you just start listing off, what you wrote down. Instead, I want you to educate. And I recommend that you do that with an illustration or a personal story, not by giving a bunch of data. Okay. Because remember, they're an emotional person. So, for example, if you want to be a doctor, you got to go to med school. Okay. You can't just be a doctor. But before you go to med school, you got to get an undergraduate degree, right? And before you can get an undergraduate degree, you got to get into college. You see where I'm going with this? You work these things backwards from the ultimate thing into the closest thing that you can get right away, the next stop in a much bigger journey. But how about another narrative? Most everybody knows Michael Jordan. Most of you have probably heard that he didn't make the very famous story of how he didn't make the varsity basketball team as a sophomore in high school. Now, if you were sitting down with 15-year-old Michael and he said he wanted to be the greatest basketball player ever, how would you start playing? If you wanted to inspire action and not make it just so big, because if you say these are the things you got to do to be the greatest player ever, a 15-year-old probably can't even fathom that. So you'd start at the end and work backwards. From that excellence, you'd work back to just making the NBA and just making the college and then high school and finally to just making varsity next year. Then you get really specific about what it's going to take to make the team next year. You don't need all the specifics about the NBA or college, but that's the dream, and the dream is stimulating. The first step to making varsity high school squad is the same first step to being the greatest ever. A journey of 1,000 miles, as you've heard, starts with one step. The reason that this creating a narrative important is because it's more emotional and more memorable. Lots of people start by talking about just doing, the next step rather than attaching that next step to the ultimate goal. But the first step is so hard to take for its own sake. The step needs to be connected to something that is emotionally stimulating, because the first step is so painful and people don't want to change. So, what you're looking to do is link the next steps into a really big, emotional, wonderful why we are doing this. Why am I doing this? Remember, in order for most people to change anything, they have to believe that the future payoff is a whole lot better than what they're going to give up. Okay, once you've got the expectations set and the goals listed in terms of priority, then what? Now you'll work backward from the ultimate goal to the immediate next steps. So, what are the prerequisites for the next steps? The many goals that you have to achieve on your way to the ultimate dream. So, let's say you've decided that you're going to buy a house, that's your most important goal. But maybe before that, you need to pay off debt or save for a down payment. So start listing the prerequisites for building the house. But now, listen carefully. Write this down. You should not connect, you should connect paying off the debt to building the house. Paying off debt is more exciting when it's framed with the excitement about the future and dreaming about building a house. Paying off debt is not exciting for anyone. Building a house is. Now, write this down. Get in the habit of thinking about and talking about every action you take to pay off debt as being an action towards buying the dream home or whatever the ultimate dream is. But don't get detailed yet. You're still keeping the conversation at a high level on most things. Your goal is to make sure your partner sees the steps and gets excited about the journey, not to make them feel overwhelmed by the details. Eventually, you're going to aim to agree on the next steps towards getting to the prerequisite that comes next for achieving your goal. In other words, in order to buy a house, you're agreeing on next steps for paying off your debt so you can buy the house. Remember, connect the actions to the ultimate dream. Paying off debt isn't emotionally stimulating. Buying a house is. See what I'm saying? You need to stimulate your partner's emotions when talking about boring and painful short-term actions. Remember, the key is to involve your partner. Connect today's actions to tomorrow's payoff. You're planning the journey together, which will help you get buy-in from your partner. Ask them for their input. Make them feel valued. And remember to keep connecting the short-term actions with the long-term payout. Let's just take a minute and review this for a second. Okay, so we're discussing money with your spouse. That can be challenging because of cognitive biases like confirmation bias and loss aversion. But when you understand these biases, you can strategically navigate the conversations to avoid triggering negative reactions. Next, we're going to create excitement by positively engaging with your partner's emotions. Use positive framing. Connect these boring actions to the exciting final goal. You need to create a safe place and focus on the shared dreams to keep the conversation productive and positive. Planning the journey together from ultimate goals to immediate steps, that ensures that both of you are going to be emotionally invested in the process. Now, the approach, I think it's crucial because it transforms these potentially contentious conversations into opportunities for a deeper connection and mutual understanding. You want your partner to feel good about the conversation. Now, by prioritizing emotions and this strategic conversation, you can build a stronger financial partnership with your spouse, and that's going to lead to a more harmonious and financially secure relationship. That means more success for both of you. Now, there's so much to talk about with money and psychology, relationships, and communication. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below and maybe I'll tackle them in a future video. If you found this video helpful, please like it, comment, follow for more insights on money and relationships, and even share this with a friend. Thank you for watching. I'm Dr. Joshua Wilson, and I just hope this helps you have a more productive and positive conversation about money with your spouse. Thank you.